Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Tzadi. Today's daf is sponsored by Ann Klausner in memory of her friend Jane Friedman Zichrona Levarcha, Shendel Bat Harav Pinchas and Edna Yenta, whose 7th year at site was Monday, the 10th of Adar. Jane was an inspirational woman. Her emunah in Hashem was awe-inspiring, even in the face of tremendous health challenges. May she be a militzat yosher for all of Am Yisrael. And by Ruchi Summer, in honor of her mother, Meryl Sasnowitz, on her birthday. Her dedication to education and Torah learning has inspired her family. May she continue to take pleasure in the Hadran Daf Yomi with love from her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Okay, we're going to start Daf Tzadi Hey from the very top of the page. Today's daf is going to be about the Korban Pesach Sheni and what the differences are between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. I shouldn't even say the Korban. The question is that day, and this is a very basic question about what's the nature of the day? Is it a holiday? Is it not a holiday? Right nowadays, the two ways we remember the Pesach Sheni, there's two basic things that are relevant to us. One is there's a custom people eat matzah. That's one thing, which is not exactly a halachic thing. It's just a minhag. The halachic issue is that you don't say tachanun on that day because it is considered some sort of a holiday. On the other hand, tachanun, there's all sorts of days that people don't say tachanun. So not exactly it's not a proof that it's really a holiday, but it has a special nature to the day. So the Mishnah starts off with our exact question that you want to know, which is Ma ben Pesach Harishon L'Sheni. What are the differences? And you're going to see it's not just the differences, also what are the similarities. Okay, there's a lot of charts in today's Shiur because it's very chartable material. Harishon Asur B'Bal Yira'eh B'Bal Yimatzeh. So the first one is forbidden. You can't find chametz. You can't have chametz in your house. We already know this. We spent the whole beginning of the Masechet discussing this. V'hasheni chametz u'matzayim o b'bayit. But on Pesach Sheni, there's no problem. You can have chametz in your house, no problem at all. And you can obviously also have matzah, right? You can have anything. Harishon ta'un halel ba'achilato. V'hasheni eno ta'un halel ba'achilato. The night of the Seder, one of the things that we do is we say Hallel, right? We're getting very close, by the way. I want you to know we're in shouting distance of our Pesachim, okay? We're almost done with the Korbanot. By Sunday, we'll be there. So the Rishon is Ta'un Halel Ba'achilato. You're supposed to say Hallel. V'hasheni eino Ta'un Halel Ba'achilato. But when you eat the Pesach Sheni at night, you don't say Hallel, okay? There's no Hallel recitation when you eat the Pesach, the meat. Now we're going to get to the similarities. However, there's two Hallels that you say. There's Hallel, if you remember, we learned about it when they were sacrificing the Korban Pesach, they would recite Hallel. Remember, they would even recite it a number of times while they were sacrificing it. So you also say Hallel when you're slaughtering the Korban Pesach. Today we'll see why exactly you do that. So not only in Pesach Rishon, but also in Pesach Sheni, you're going to say Hallel while you're in the temple sacrificing the animal and doing all the avodot, everything you're supposed to be doing there. Nechalim tzali al matzah u'merorim. You also eat it roasted. You deal with the meat the exact same way, only roasted. And you eat it with matzah and maror. Okay, this is, right, think about when you make dinner, right? You make meat and then you want to have a side dish, right? So that day you don't have to worry about what your side dishes are. It's quite obvious. You're going to have matzah and you're going to have maror next to your meat. V'dochin et haShabbat. And interestingly, right, you might not have thought this was the case, but if Pesach Sheni falls on Shabbat, you bring your korban also on that day. You might have thought it's kind of like milah shelo bizmana. Remember brit milah that you don't do on the 8th day? So once it's pushed off, it doesn't override Shabbat. But this is different, which shows, again, these get to really the nature of what this day is all about. This is very day specific. You know, in fact, it goes back to that question that I know a lot of people are really struggling with about the menstruating women. And, you know, it's too bad. Like, it has to be this day. So if you're going to be menstruating this month and you're menstruating the same time next month, there's nothing we could do about it. It's only on that day. It's not like you get a second chance whenever you want. It's specifically exactly on your Dalet Iyar. That's when we do it, no matter what. Even if it's on Shabbat, it doesn't make a difference. Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to have a few brightot that are going to show where we derive this from. Today's going to be one of those days where the sheet will be very helpful because it brings all the psukim. We're going to have a lot of drashot and psukim. And in fact, some of the drashot are going to be a similar style of drasha. Not this one in particular, but we'll see some that come later where they connect between two verses, and what's true for one is going to be true for the other, and that's going to be, so it's important to see them inside and see that they're actually right next to each other. But in this one, let's read the few psukim that talk about Pesach Sheni that are going to be relevant for us today. So in Bamidbar chapter 9, verses 10 to 12. Taber el bnei Israel, speak to bnei Israel and tell them. I'm just reading the verses, so if you have the sheet, great, or you have a Tanakh accessible, or just listen. Ish ki yatameh lanefesh o b'derech rechoka lachem o l'dorotechem v'asa Pesach laHashem. Okay, so again, if you have someone who is tameh lanefesh or far away, and now he's going to do the Pesach to make up for it. B'chodesh hashini b'arba'asar yom ben ha'arba'im yasu oto. When does he do it? On the second month, the 14th of the month, right, which would be Yudalid Iyar. Al matzot u'merorim yochluhu. He eats it with matzah and maror. So there you see it's explicitly. This is obvious now why the Mishnah said it, because it says it in the text. But then it says some other things in the text that don't appear in the Mishnah. Lo yash'iru mimenu ad boker. The same rules about leaving the meat over till the morning are also applicable. And ve'etzem lo yishberu bo. And don't break bones just like in Pesach Rishon. Kechol chukata Pesach yaseh oto. You keep to all the rules of the Pesach. Now, what we have here is a classic structure of prat uklal. You have a lot of details, and then you get a generalization, right? Where all of a sudden, and normally when you have, if you start off with a generalization and then you have details, we usually say we're going to limit it to only things that are just like the details. But when you start with details and then have a generalization, what we say is the generalization is coming to add on to the details. Now, it's only though going to add on to the details in a way that's similar to the details, but with a little bit more leeway, okay? When it's klal and then prat, we're going to be more limited into how we say like the details. We're going to say only really like the details. When we have it like this, where the generalization comes after, they assume the generalization is coming to add on something additional. So we're going to later, okay, this Braita is not going to be talking as much about this, but the second Braita is going to get into how exactly this klal prat works, what is it including and what is it excluding. So let's read the first Braita. That was the very last words of the verse. What kind of chukot? Now they're going to say, well, not all the laws of Pesach are applicable because we already know they're not. So what does it mean? They're talking about mitzvot that have to do with the animal itself. All the rules about the animal and the sacrificing of the animal are all the same. Mitzvah she'al gufo minayin. Okay, there's going to be they sound the same, but it's not really the same. If you know Hebrew well, it's not. Mitzvah shebigufo means with the animal itself. Mitzvot she'al gufo, on its body, on the body of the korban, that means things that go together with the korban. How do we know that those also are going to be the same? Talmud Lomar, al matzot u'merorim yochluhu. Because matzah and maror are external to the korban. It doesn't have to do with the sacrificing of the korban. It's just something you do with the korban. So that's also going to be the same. We learn that from the fact that one of the examples given was al matzot u'merorim yochluhu. That comes to include not only things that deal with the animal itself, like let's say, etzem lo yishberu bo, that's directly the animal, but things that go together with the sacrifice, like eating it with matzah and maror. Now, once we're already going far in that direction, saying we're going to include more things, maybe we're going to go even farther. Yachol afilu mitzvot shelo al gufo. Maybe it even includes things that have nothing to do with the animal and just have to do with Pesach in general, like getting rid of your chametz in your house, or right, all that. Talmud Lomar ve'etzem lo yishberu bo. No, it has to be somewhat similar to the details. Now, breaking the bone, mashvirat etzem miyuchad mitzvah shebegufo, av kol mitzvah shebegufo. Now, it's a bit of a strange drasha because in the end they say, well, then it's only things that actually have to do with the animal. But you can't get rid of matzot u'merorim, so we end up with two. We end up with things that have to do directly with the animal and things that have to do indirectly with the animal, right? They are eaten together with the animal. Now, with the sacrifice. That last line, so we now had three, right? We had three sections of this. We started with kol chukata Pesach, which meant to say things that they have to do with the korban. We said al matzot u'merorim, which included al gufo, and then we said etzem lo yishberu bo, meant to say only things that have to do with the sacrifice and not things that are totally unrelated to the sacrifice. But that last drasha, that it's only the sacrifice, is coming to exclude things like chametz, let's say, and having chametz in your house. So Isi ben Yehuda has a different drasha for that last one. He doesn't learn it from etzem lo yishberu bo, and then we're going to have a ping pong. What does each one do with the others first? He learns it from Ya'asu oto. What is Ya'asu oto? Right? Kechol chukata Pesach Ya'asu oto. B'mitzvot shebegufo hakatuv medaber. Ya'asu oto. What's oto referring to? The korban, right? Do all the rules of Pesach. Do it. It meaning things related to the Pesach Korban, to the sacrifice. The whole topic there was a sacrifice. So therefore, we're basically going to say from Yasuoto, so there's machloket. Do we learn it from Etzem Lo Yishbrubo and that type of mitzvah, or do we learn it from the Yasuoto? So Amar, first we're going to go back and we're going to have 3 questions on the Braita. The last 2 are, what does Isi ben Yehuda do with Tanakama's pasuk, and what does Tanakama do with Isi ben Yehuda's pasuk? But the first one is a different question on the Braita. Amar, so first they're quoting from the Braita. Yachol af mitzvah shelo al gufo. Now, at the end it says, right, you might have thought, in the 3rd section, you might have thought mitzvot shelo al gufo. So they say that doesn't make any sense in the structure of the Braita that they're even asking this, because what was the first line? Ha'amalt mitzvah shebigufo katuv medaber. We already said kechol chulchat pesach yasuoto comes to tell you b'mitzvot shebigufo. So why all of a sudden are you suggesting otherwise? So they say hachikama. No, what they really mean to say is like this. It started off saying only mitzvot shebigufo. Then what did it do? It said, well, not only mitzvot shebigufo, but also mitzvot she'al gufo. So what they're saying is like this. Hachikama. Now that you already included more by saying mitzvot she'al gufo, alma yasuoto lav dafkahu. Maybe when you started with the quote of Kechol Pesach yasuoto, maybe it's not only mitzvot shebigufo, because you already said it's actually not only mitzvot shebigufo, it's also mitzvot she'al gufo. It's also things that go along with the korban. So ema have le kiprat uklal v'nasa klal mosif ala prat v'afilu kol milenami. Now the question is, when you say that the klal, right? Again, this is a prat uklal structure, which means that it's true that things we discussed in the beginning are mitzvot she'al gufo, mitzvot shebigufo, on the right, the korban itself, and mitzvot she'al gufo, and things that go along with the sacrifice. But maybe the klal is coming to say, and it even, remember, prat and klal includes all sorts of other things that aren't mentioned. So maybe we go even farther. In other words, once we already said we don't take this 100% clear, it's not exclusively bigufo, it's also al gufo. So maybe we'll take it even farther and say maybe it's all the halachot of Pesach, and it even sounds a little bit like that when it says kechol chukat Pesach, right? Like all the laws of Pesach. So maybe you would think that that's included. Kamash malan, that's why the end of the Braita has to come and say, no. We don't go that far. Okay. Now, as I said, we're going to now question Isi ben Yehuda. What does he do with the other pasuk? Isi ben Yehuda hai etzem my avidle. What does he do with the fact that it says etzem lo yishbirubo when we already know it from Pesach Rishon, and we already said it, anything that has to do with the korban is included, like by saying notar, for example. So why did you need to add this also? So if you recall, we already learned this drasha, which is the reason why it says there etzem lo tishbrubo and here etzem lo yishbrubo, and it repeats it. Why does it repeat it? It's to tell you that there's 2 kinds of bones, and it refers to both, not only bones that don't have meat inside, but even the bones that have meat, marrow inside. Why would you have thought maybe it doesn't apply? Because remember, there's a mitzvah asay to eat all the meat, and if you can't get to the marrow but by breaking the bones, then maybe the asay of eating the meat would, right? Pesach, remember you have to eat it. That might override breaking bones. No, it's repeated to tell you it's not the case. It doesn't override it, and then he uses it for a totally different drasha. So what do the rabbis do with yasuoto? Remember, Isi ben Yehuda says yasuoto means, only things have to do with the Pesach itself. Mebaile, this is a very interesting halacha. She'en shochatin et haPesach ala yachid. You can't sacrifice the korban Pesach as an individual. Pesach Sheni, okay, not just Pesach. Remember Pesach Rishon, we saw there was a machloket about it, right? Whether you can do it on an individual or not. Here he says, you can't do Pesach Sheni as an individual. Now, why is that more difficult than Pesach Rishon? Because maybe there aren't a lot of people doing Pesach Sheni this year. And maybe you'll be stuck. Let's say you're the only one who is tameh. So this is a fascinating halacha, and it's hard to imagine that they really did this. That means you try as hard as you can to find someone to do Pesach Sheni with you. What does this mean? How do you find someone? So according to, I think it's even Rashi says it. Let me refresh my memory. Just see if I can find it in Rashi. Okay, if you look just before the lines get wide. Oh, by the way, I didn't say this, but Yasu is plural. That's where he gets it from. Yasuoto means people Number of people have to do it together, meaning more than one. Now, here comes the big thing in Rashi. Dekama de'efshar la'adure achar tamei chavero lihimanot imo mahadrinan kigon. You ready for this? Litamei echa b'sheretz. Rashi says, make someone become impure. You have to think about this already on Pesach Rishon. You can go and make someone impure. By the way, you would have to say ein shochatim v'zorkin al tmei sheretz, according to Rashi here, right? Otherwise, tmei sheretz normally could actually do the Korban Pesach according to some opinions. But anyway, he's basically saying, think about it already on Pesach Rishon that you might not find someone, and therefore, right now, go ahead and make somebody else tamei. Okay, make them miss their opportunity to do it on Pesach Rishon. It's a crazy thought, and then you have to do it. Then you'll have someone else to do it with. Okay, so as you're asking, Stuart, this is what it sounds like it has to be done. A chabura. Chabura can be two people. So it sounds like it has to be done in a chabura. That's what they're learning from Yasu Oto. So therefore, you have to basically make sure that you find someone, which is really interesting because you can't necessarily find someone who's tamei. And according to this, that means you have to actively make someone become tamei so that you can have someone. Okay, so it's very interesting, right? I see Tova saying, right, when you're in around the temple on Pesach Rishon, just watch out, watch your back, make sure no one's trying to throw some sheretz on top of you to mess you up. So anyway, it's a very interesting halacha, and why is it so interesting? Because the whole idea here is you get a second chance, right? If you messed up, you get a second chance. You're basically causing someone to. Theoretically, you could have a problem Pesach Sheni. Remember, we discussed what happens if you didn't do Pesach Rishon, and then you also couldn't do Pesach Sheni. It could be you'll end up being tamei again. And then this poor person, he could have done it, and in the end, you messed him up just so that he could help you out. And in the end, right, he can't do his Pesach at all, which is just an interesting thought of how we're basically narrowing this person's possibilities. They no longer have two opportunities, right? It's like we talked about Moed Bet and Moed Aleph and in tests that you can have a makeup test. So if someone prevents you, right, they couldn't do makeup test one. So they say, well, you know what? I want to make my friend not be able to do it either, right? And they, I don't know, get someone sick or you're, you need a quarantine. So you go and mess up your other friend that also now needs to quarantine or something just so that, they're in the same situation as you are. That's really not fair because you're preventing them from having those two chances. Anyway, very, very interesting line. Okay, let's move on. Tanu Rabbanit. Next Braita. This Braita is going to have a bit of a different structure. Kechol chukat Pesach yasu oto. Yachol kashem sharishon asur b'bal yereh o bal yimatzeh kach sheni asur b'bal yereh o bal yimatzeh. They're getting basically to the same things, but they're going to get a little more detail oriented here. So when it says kechol chukat Pesach yasu oto, you might have thought that it sounds like all the laws. What are all the laws? Well, get rid of all your chametz from your house, right? Make sure you don't have, make sure you don't see. So you might have thought, but it says, it's Talmud Lamar, al matzot u'merurim yochluhu. No, it tells you, no, it's only things that go together with the Korban Pesach. Now, the real question or the issue that this Braita is dealing with is, why does it say three details? Okay, we have al matzot u'merurim yochluhu. We have notar lo yashiru mimenu ad boker. Don't leave it till the morning. You have to eat the meat that night. And etzem lo yishberu bo. So with this Braita, the author of this Braita is very smart. He says, let's look at these three things. These three things are each different from each other. They each must be coming to teach you something in particular. So what do they say? Matzot u'merurim yochlu comes to teach you only things related to the Korban. Okay, fine. That we got already. But now they say, Ein li ela mitzvat aseh. This only includes positive commandments because al matzot u'merurim yochlu is a positive commandment. Mitzvah lo taseh minayin. How do I know that all the negative commandments associated with the korban are included here? Okay, because that's the first difference between al matzot u'merurim and the other two. The other two are negative. This is positive. Obviously, we're going to have to come up with a difference between the two negative ones also. So then they say, lo taseh minayin. Talmud lamar lo yashiu mimenu aboker. Don't leave it till the morning. That's a negative commandment. There we learn positive and negative. Okay, you would think that would cover you. So why do we need a third? Oh, wait, that's a unique one. Remember, we learned lo totiru is the classic example of mitzvah lo taseh ani tak laseh, which means you have a negative commandment, but there's a positive way to fix it. If you do it, you burn it in the morning. So this is not your classic lo taseh. It's what we would call a weaker lo taseh, because remember, you don't get punished for this, according to most opinions, because the mitzvah aseh fixes it. So you do that instead of being punished. So now, and even if you don't do it, you still don't get punished. So now that only teaches us mitzvah lo taseh shenitak laseh. Mitzvot lo taseh gamur minayin. How do we know that also full-fledged lo tasehs are also included? Talmud Lomar ve'etzem lo yishbiru bo. So now they say that includes, that's a classic negative commandment, nothing to fix it with, right? You obviously can't fix broken bones. They're broken. So anyway, that's your classic lo taseh. So now they say, and this is how we read, and now we're in the real classic the pratu klal drasha. Ma prat. So now, again, we're going to say it's all like all the details. Ma prat miforash mitzvat taseh v'lo taseh shenitak laseh v'lo taseh gamur. We now understand why there's three. The pratim are all each of these three categories. Af kol mitzvat taseh. So therefore, we're going to apply this to all mitzvot taseh v'lo taseh shenitak laseh v'lo taseh gamur. Okay, we're therefore going to include all these things. Okay, which again, only ones that are connected to the sacrifice, because that's what we started with. Now, before we go on, I want to talk about this, because if I were writing this, I would have thought, or you might have thought, that where would you start? What would you think is obviously more included? What's always more stringent? The lo taseh. So I would have thought to do this as not only is the lo taseh, but even the weaker one, the lo taseh and nitak laseh, and then even the positive ones are also part of it. And I think that this gets a little bit at the nature of Pesach Sheni. I wanted to just think about this out loud. And obviously, this is just food for thought, and you can think about it in your own direction. The first reason why I think the Braita goes in this way, and I think it's the obvious answer, is because that's the order of the pasuk, right? The pasuk started with the aseh, went to the lavanitak laseh, and then went to the lo taseh gamul. And that's obviously why the Braita goes in that order. But the question is, why does the pasuk go in that order, right? You would think that you would first mention the most strict, which is, right, it's obvious we're going to, if there's all these lo tasehs associated with Korban Pesach, then obviously when it comes to Pesach Sheni, we're going to do the same things. But maybe it's not so obvious. And maybe the idea here, and maybe it goes to the fact that our custom is we eat matzah, but nobody gets rid of their chametz on Pesach Sheni, right? We don't try to not eat chametz on that day at all, right? We just have a minhag, some people, to eat matzah that day. That's a pot. And maybe the idea here about a second chance is we have a way to do the positive things, but maybe they're not necessarily associated with all the negative commandments. Maybe it's just a way of making things up, and maybe it doesn't have all the same rules, but it's a more positive kind of act to say, oh, maybe even symbolic of, I want to do something like the korban, but it doesn't have to have all the details, because we're just trying to make up, and maybe it's not exactly the same. To which the Torah says, no. It's exactly the same, right? It has all the details. It has all the lo tasehs, but it could be that that's why they started with the asehs, because you might have thought those were more obvious, right? And then how do we know the others? And then those come after. Anyway, I think it requires a little more thinking about why it's in this order and not the other order. Right? You would have thought it would be more obvious, all the negative, right? Don't break a bone, just like you can't break a bone the first time. And always those are more strict, and you would think those were more obvious. Anyway, this is the opposite. Now, if you look, I charted this all out. So I charted out the Braita, and now we're beyond the Braita. Now the Braita, the Gemara wants to say, well, if this is a prat uklal structure, then again, as I told you this before, the klal comes to add something that wasn't in the detail. So we already said the three pratim are to teach you aseh, lo taseh nitak laseh, and lo taseh gamul. So now the question is, what is each one coming to include in addition to the case that it mentions? So my bichlale de matzot u'merurim, when now the way we read this is the klal of kechol chukat pesach yasu oto is coming to add on to matzot u'merurim. What's it coming to add on, right? Because you have matzot u'merurim and then you have the klal after. So what's the klal coming to add? My kamerabe tzli esh. Also the way that you roast the meat, which we saw in the Mishnah already. This is kind of how we get it from the pasuk to the Mishnah. So now, what's it excluding then? So they say, what other, right? We're trying to find mitzvot aseh that are connected with Pesach that it's not including. So what's it not including that's a mitzvot aseh? Hashpatat seor, getting rid of your chametz, right? Burning it. That's a mitzvot aseh. Positive commandment to burn your chametz. So we don't have that. So they say, ipuchana, why are you learning that one and not that one? Now we already know the answer to this. Ana, and this is going to be the answer to all of them. Mitzvah de gufe adif, right? When it has to do with the goof of the korban, we're going to obviously include that one over something that has nothing to do with the korban, which is burning your chametz, has nothing to do with the sacrifice. Bichlale, same structure. The klal of lo yashiru mimenu aboker, my kamerabele. So now we have to find, what does it include that's a lav hanitak la'aseh? So what are they going to include? Lo totzi mimenu. Okay, what is this? You can't take the korban out of your house. Once you bring it into the house, you're supposed to eat it in the house, and once it's there, you're not allowed to remove it. Remember, you can't move from chabura to chabura. The meat has to stay in your house. Now, that's also a lav hanitak la'aseh, because it says bebayit echad yachel, and it says lo totzi mimenu. Okay, so there you have the positive and the negative. So that's the one it's coming to include, that it has to be also eaten in the house, just like the korban pesach. You can't take it out once you put it in. What's it coming to exclude? Lo yire'eh v'lo yimatzeh, which is also a lav hanitak la'aseh, because you can't find it in your house, right? What if you do? You have to burn it. So there you have it. Okay, it's just like the notar is burned. So again, ipuchana, why are we including the one in the house, but not including getting rid of your chametz, so that you can't see your chametz? Well, that's obvious, because mitzvah degufei adif. Again, we'd rather include one that has to do with the sacrifice itself. What about this? My kamerabe, what's it coming to include? Al tochlu mimenu na. What's a lota say? Don't eat it raw, which we learned was half, right? Half roasted, half raw. Biprate, my kamimai, what's it coming to exclude? This one is a little tricky because it's slightly connected to the korban, but not exactly. Lo tishchat al chametz dam zivchi. First of all, you notice all of them are connected with chametz, because that's the main thing that doesn't apply in Pesach Sheni. And it means, remember, you can't, while you're sacrificing, you can't have chametz either with you in the asara or in your house. There were different opinions about this, but again, it's the chametz issue, that while you're sacrificing, you can't have chametz in your house. It's obviously connected with bal yareh, bal yamatzeh, and all that. So that wouldn't apply. So again, ipuchana, why don't we swap? Mitzvah degufei adif, right? We'd rather include something that has to do with the sacrifice itself. Now we're moving along with all the cases in the Mishnah. So harishon ta'un halel, remember, and the second, you don't do halel when you eat it. So banane mile, where do we get this from? That you don't do halel Pesach Sheni when you're eating the meat. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadek. Amar Kha, the pasuk says, Hashir yihiyeh lachem kelel hitkadesh chag. Okay, you have to know where this verse is from, because it's not from the Torah when it talks about Pesach Sheni, but it's from, or Pesach Rishon really, but it's in Yeshayahu. Okay, it's a pasuk in Yeshayahu, and it says, so there's this idea of leil hitkadesh chag, that you say a shir, you sing a song on a night that was sanctified as a holiday. Now, what would that be? That would be the night of Pesach, where it's a holiday when you eat the meat, because it's already Chag HaMatzot, right? The holiday of Pesach, right? I'm trying to call it Chag HaMatzot because in those days they actually called Yudalig Chag HaPesach, but it's not the same type of Chag, right? It's a Chag that doesn't have, it's not forbidden to do work or anything, right? I mean, there's a minhag not to do work, but it's not the same kind of thing. It's not sanctified. But here, Leil Hitkadesh Chag, okay? That night is sanctified as a holiday. So what do they learn from here? Laila hamekudash l'chag ta'un halel. Laila she'em mekudash l'chag ein ta'un halel. So a night that was sanctified for a holiday needs halal. But Pesach Sheni, when you eat the meat that night, you don't, it's not a holiday. There's no chag, there's no isser malacha. It's not sanctified. So that wouldn't need halal. Okay, interesting. They learned from Pesach in Yoshua, right, that it's not exactly a halachic thing, but that's how they darshan it. Zeh v'zeh ta'un halal ba'asiyatan. Now, both of them need halal when you're actually sacrificing the korban. So my taima, and the Gemara is going to suggest them as ibait ema and ibait ema, which means if you want, you could say this. If you want, you could say that. That means we're giving you two suggestions. We don't know which is right, but you could say this. Laila kamimait, yom lo kamimait. Let's take that last verse. That last verse was limiting it to a night that's sanctified for the holiday. But notice the limitation is only at nighttime. There's no limitation during the day. So if you would do it during the day, when you sacrifice, then you would do it during the day also on Pesach Sheni. Ibait Ema, the second answer, and I think this is a more convincing one, and it's very interesting in light of another sugya, which I'll mention, and I want you to remember this when we get to Sukkah. Efshar Yisrael shochatina pischeihem v'notnim et lulavehem ve'ein omrim halel. Could it be that you can't even imagine a situation that you're in the middle of slaughtering or taking your lulav and you don't say halal? Like that's part and parcel of halal, is part of the whole mitzvah of doing this, which seems like there's a sort of ritual about this, right? And notice why is this interesting in terms of lulav? because they're making a comparison between slaughtering the Korban Pesach and the mitzvah of Nitilat Lulav. Okay, why is this so interesting? Well, in Sukkah, in Perek Lulav Gazul, there's a discussion. Can you bring a lulav, right? A mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a very famous sugya about taking something that you stole a lulav, and you use it for a mitzvah. And the question is, and it says, hayitav b'nei Hashem, is God going to accept that? And it says God wouldn't accept a korban that's maimed, okay, that there's a blemish on it. So why would God accept this, right? Here you stole it. And also it talks about it, I think, in the context of lulav yavesh, a dried lulav. And the question is, why is it comparing it to sacrifices? What does a lulav have to do with sacrifices? And the Yerushalmi there does seem to indicate, I don't remember the details of the Yerushalmi, but when we get there, you'll remind me that we have to go back to here, that there's this comparison between animals and sacrifices and lulav and etrog and the four minim, and that they're a type of worship. There's a whole approach that one approach is to say that this is a way of worshiping. Rav Soloveitchik would make sure to always say the bracha before Hallel, and not just in the morning, because it's part and parcel part of Hallel. Like, how could you take a lulav and not say Hallel on it? Because the taking of the lulav is a type of ritual of worship of God, as opposed to, taking something nice but no, it's like sacrifice. Okay, it's like doing a sacrifice. And here you see the comparison, which is interesting. So we'll see it there. We'll see it here. It's an interesting, just good to remember that it's here. Okay, nechalim tzali. Okay, so now it's eaten roasted. Now, that's not the part that's going to interest the Gemara. It says v'chule. So read to the end of the Mishnah. What does it say? Right? You eat it roasted with matzah and maror. That's not so interesting. And it is interesting, but it's not what the Gemara is going to be interested in dealing with right now. V'dochin et haShabbat, and it overrides Shabbat. So now they say Shabbat in. Notice what's mentioned, and notice what's not mentioned. Tuma lo. It doesn't mention Tuma. Remember? It overrides Shabbat. And remember, we talked about overriding Shabbat, how the korban also overrides Tumah, meaning if the majority of the people are impure, then you can do the korban. Okay? But here, it doesn't say that. It said it only overrides Shabbat. It doesn't override Tumah. So the assumption is, Matnitin to look at Rabbi Yehuda, and the Mishnah must not match Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Titania, it says in a Braita, Dochet HaShabbat ve'ein dochet HaTumah. That matches our Mishnah. This is Tanakama's opinion. It overrides Shabbat, but it doesn't override Tumah. So if the majority of the people have to do Pesach Sheni or Tmeim, you can't do it. Okay? Tough luck. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af dochet HaTumah. Rabbi Yehuda holds it does override Tumah. So therefore, our Mishnah must not match Rabbi Yehuda, because our Mishnah doesn't say that. So my time into Tanakama. What's the reason for Tanakama? Well, Mipnei Tum'ah dechitiv. It's a very interesting answer. He says, you couldn't do Pesach Rishon because you were impure. So when we give you your makeup, you're also going to be impure, and then we're going to let you do it? That doesn't make any sense. The whole idea was, we want you to do it b'tahara. And, well, if you can't do it b'tahara because you're tamei and everyone else is, well, we're not going to allow you to do it either. Because the whole idea was to fix the tumah. You're not fixing anything if in the end you're going to do it b'tum'ah. But Rabbi Yehuda says, listen, you're right that the Torah wanted to have him do it b'tahara. But what are you going to do? Lo zacha yaseh b'tumah. If in the end he's tamei again and everyone else is tamei, and there's no way that anyone can do a Pesach Sheni, well then we'll allow it. Okay, again, it's just the majority. I kind of say it as anyone, but as long as the majority is tamei, you can do it. Tanu Rabbanit. Pesach. This is a Mishnah that if you or I were a bride to if you or I written, we would have written it much simpler. Okay, it's got a lot of extra words here, but we'll read it as it's written, and then we'll summarize it as it's meant to be read. Pesach Rishon dochet Shabbat. Pesach Sheni dochet Shabbat. Right. So Pesach Rishon overrides Shabbat, and Pesach Sheni overrides Shabbat. Pesach Rishon dochet Tumah. Pesach Sheni dochet Tumah. Pesach Rishon overrides Tumah. Pesach Sheni also overrides Tumah. Again, this is obviously, we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda's opinion because Tanakama doesn't agree. Pesach Rishon ta'un lina. Pesach Sheni ta'un lina. Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni both require that you stay overnight in Jerusalem. You have to stay where you are that night, and then you can only leave in the morning. Okay, now, right, the simple way of reading this would be Pesach Rishon v'Sheni, dochim et HaShabbat, dochim et HaTumah, and ta'un lina. Okay, that would have been the easier way to say it, which would have been just a simpler way to understand it, but this happens to just spell it out with a lot more extra words. So now, they say, Kiman, who's this Braita like? Rabbi Yehuda, obviously. But it doesn't make sense it's Rabbi Yehuda because, the Rabbi Yehuda ta'un lina, the last part doesn't match Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. V'hatanya, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Minayin lePesach Sheni she'ein ta'un lina. How do we know that Pesach Sheni doesn't require that you stay overnight? Shene'emal, it says, now here again, this is you're going to need, I told you that we're going to darshan a bunch of psukim and the connection between two verses. The psukim say, if you look in Dvarim Tet Zayin, Pasuk Zayin, it says, Ubishalta v'achalta b'makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha, you should cook it and eat it in the place that God chose. Ufanita baboker v'alachta olecha, and then you go in the morning and you go to your tents, meaning only in the morning. That means you have to stay overnight. Sheshet yamim tochal matzot ubayom hashvi atzer el Hashem Elokecha lo taseh melacha. The next verse says, and for 6 days you should eat matzah. On the 7th, it's a holiday. So what do you see here? They're going to say they're obviously connected. So, well, otherwise, why would it appear in the next verse? So they're going to say, Rabbi Yehuda says, it says, Panita baboker v'alachta lo alecha. You have to stay overnight. Uchtiv sheshet yamim tochal matzot, which comes to teach you, hanechal l'shisha ta'un lina, she'enechal l'shisha ein ta'un lina. Only if you're eating matzah for 6 days, which is not going to be on Pesach Sheni, then you need to stay overnight, but not if you don't. So the answer, the Gemara answers is Trei Tanai Liba de Rabbi Yehuda. There must be a machloket about how to understand Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Does he think you need lina or doesn't he? Because there's no other way to understand this braita other than to say it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The fact that it doesn't match his opinion about lina must mean there's a machloket. It's an interesting, there's a tosefta that says that the day you sacrifice a korban is a holiday for you. And then it's like a regel, and if it's like a regel, then you need to stay overnight. So some people say that's why, right, that the machloket is, do we hold by this tosefta or not? Do we view the day you bring a korban as if it's a holiday, as if it's a Yom Tov for you? And if you do, then you would have to stay overnight. If you don't view it this way, then you wouldn't have to stay overnight. And maybe that's the source of the debate between the two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda, whether he says it is or whether he says it isn't, whether Pesach Sheni would need lina or not. Do we view any day you bring a korban as if it's a holiday for you? Okay, next. Yes, it doesn't say anything, Joanna, about the 4 cups. Okay, so it doesn't seem like any of the other Seder stuff applies. It's just you eat the meat with matzah and maror, but it doesn't seem like you have Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim telling the story, any of that stuff. Okay, moving on, new Mishnah. If we're talking already about Pesach Haba B'Tumah, maybe that's why the Gemara brought it up, because it's in the next Mishnah. HaPesach Shaba B'Tumah. Let's say we're now off topic of difference between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, but if you have a year, the Pesach is brought B'Tumah, okay, we're finished with Pesach Sheni now. Lo yochlu mimenu zavim v'zavot nidot v'yodot. Okay, now let's go back to what we learned about Pesach Haba B'Tumah. It's only for Tzme'ei Met. Remember, it's only for people who became impure due to a dead body, not people who are impure for all sorts of other reasons, like the Zavims, the Zavot, the lepers, the menstruating women, all those. So now, if you have a Pesach Shaba B'Tumah, so it only allows it for the Tzme'ei Met. It doesn't allow you, if you're a Zav, Zava, or all those other people, to eat the Korban Pesach. That's what the Mishnah says. However, and again, this gets to what happens in a year when the Pesach is Ba B'Tumah. To a certain extent, Tumah is overridden, and that was the whole thing. Is it Hutra? Is it Techuya? Is it here, just pushed aside, or is it really not here at all? The question is, what happens if someone who's Tameh comes in anyway and eats the meat? So now, they say, V'im achlu, p'turim mikaret. If they did eat, normally, what happens? You get karet. If you're tameh and you eat sacrificial meat, you get karet. Not only that, if you come into the temple when you're impure, you get karet. Now, obviously, on a year like this, anyone who comes into the temple or eats the sacrificial meat who is impure to a dead person doesn't get karet, and they're in fact allowed to. What about this in-between category? All these people who are zavim, zavot, nidim, nidot, yodot, all those, what did they do? Are they not chayav karet if they eat sacrificial meat or come into the temple? So Tanakama only relates to the eating. And Tanakama says they're not allowed to, but if they do it anyway, they won't get karet this year, because this year already Tamei people are eating it. And we'll see in the Gemara where he gets this from. Rabbi Eliezer poter afal bi'at mikdash. He says not only that, also for going into the temple, you're going to be no karet. Okay, not just eating the sacrificial meat, but even going into the temple, you won't get karet. So now the Gemara is going to bring a braita from where we derive these laws. Tanu Rabbanit. Zavim v'zavot, nidot v'yodot, shachlu b'pesach haba b'tumah, yachol yuhu chayavim. You might have thought they'd be obligated, they'd be liable to get karet. Remember, being cut off, which is a punishment by God. Talmud Lamal, Okay, again, we're going to darshan 2 psukim that are right next to each other. Okay, we're now in Vayikra, Perek Zayin, psukim Yud Tet and Kaf, 19 and 20. V'habasar asher yiga bechol tamei, any meat that becomes impure, lo yechel, don't eat it, but eish yisareh, if you have to burn it, that's impure meat, that's not what we're discussing. V'habasar kol tahor yochal basar. When it comes to eating the meat, only people who are pure can eat sacrificial meat. V'hanefesh, the next pasuk says, hanefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlamim asher l'Hashem, but anyone who does eat it, v'tumato alav, when they're impure, so that second verse of getting karet is now we're going to say it's connected to the first. How so? It says, Talmud Lomar, Kol tahor yochal basal, v'hanefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlamim asher l'Hashem v'tumato alav v'nichrita. That's what we just read. So now, ne'echal l'tohorim chayavin alav mishum tameh, v'she'enu ne'echal l'tohorim ein tmeim chayavim alav mishum tameh. Say only when Kol tahor yochal basal is the second verse going to be relevant, which is you're going to get karet if you're tameh. But if it's a year where it's not kol tahor yochal basar, but the basar is being eaten, right? It's almost like unfair. You're going to say, wait a minute. All you tamei people can eat the meat, and if I eat it, I get karet, right? So they're saying, so on a year when we've already kind of pushed aside tuma, and everyone's eating it anyway, now you can't eat it. But if you do, you're not going to get karet, okay? Because that year, it's not treated as very significant. It's almost like when you eat it, you've desecrated something, but this is already, it's already not considered desecrated for a tamei person to eat it. So it's true, you don't exactly have a heter, but we're not going to give you karet for it. Next. So that's Tanakama. Rabbi Eliezer, who says not only that, but also going into the temple, he's going to say, I like his description. They push their way in, right? And what do they see? They see all these tamei people in the temple. They're like, I want to be there too. So he pushes his way in, the Zav, and he goes in, and right, they even say Zavim, a whole horde of Zavim, push their way into the temple. You might have thought they'd be obligated, they'd be liable to get karet. Talmud Lomar, again, we're going to take 2 verses that are next to each other. It says, the first way we're going to darshan this is just the pasuk itself. This means you can't be in the temple if you're a zav, remember? So, they're saying, look at who's next to each other. The zav is next to the tamei lenefesh. That means it's only going to be that you have to send them out, and if you don't, they're going to get karet if Tmei Emet are also sent out. But in the case where Tmei Emet are allowed in, we're not going to make you liable for karet. Next. Now we're going to say, right? So, right? So if they're not sent out, like in this year, then you won't be either. By Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef now asked the following question. Now, Tmei Emetim are allowed to be in the Azara, right? Because Tuma hu Trabet Sibur, right? And we allow them to come in and sacrifice the Korban Pesach. But are they allowed in the Heichal, in the inner sanctuary, right? Where the Shulchan is and the menorah, right? The more, and the Mizbach HaKshoret, the more holy area. What if, again, this lashon of dachaku, they push their way in, right? Such religious fervor. They push themselves in. So he gives 2 options. Do we say, midi ishtrei tumat azara, ishtrei nami tumat echal? Is tuma just pushed off entirely? It's as if you're not tamei. So if you go into the echal, okay, you haven't done something terrible because you're not even considered really tamei anymore. We've overridden it. Or this is part of like tuma hutra or tuma dechuya. Is it just pushed aside or is it entirely not there? And then, or dilma, my ishtrei, my delo ishtrei, my alo ishtrei. Is it just, no, they allowed you to go into the Azara because you need to sacrifice the Pesach, but they didn't allow you to go into the Echal, right? It's like we give you a little and you take a lot, right? I'm thinking about these people who have COVID vaccines, right? You can go into certain areas, but how far are we going to take it, right? Are we going to allow 3,000 people to sit in a room right next to each other? No, we're going to allow people to come in, but we're going to keep you separated. We're not going to go all the way. So now I'm a Rava, so he tries to prove it. Amarkra vayishalchu min hamachaneh, afilu miktzat machaneh. Notice it says vayishalchu min hamachaneh. There's sometimes where you're sent out from only min hamachaneh means from a machaneh, meaning from only part of a machaneh. So he's saying that's what this is coming to teach you, that sometimes, usually it's the whole machaneh you're separated from. Remember, there's the machaneh Shlina, Leviah, Yisrael. I'm not going to get into the details of that again, but the point is here we're going to do it half-half, right? You have to go out of the Hechal, but you don't have to go out of the Azara. But Some people say that Rava said the exact opposite. Amar Rava, Amar Kra. Okay, it's two versions of Rava. The pasuk says, "Vayishachu min hamachaneh." Now the next verse says, "Mizachar ad nekeva tishalechu." Right, males, females, they all have to be out. El michutz lamachaneh tishalchum. Send them out of the machaneh. So now, what do they say? Kol hecha dekrina be el michutz lamachaneh tishalchum. Krina be v'yishachu min hamachaneh. Only when you have to actually send them out of this machaneh entirely do we say v'yishachu min hamachaneh. Then you're not allowed in the whole thing. But there's no half-half. Okay, so basically, according to this, if they're allowed in the Asara, then they're allowed in the Hechal. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you're not going to get obligated liable for karet if you do it. Okay, that's it for today. We will pick up with another question of Rav Yosef tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.